Welcome to This Is Money podcast, sponsored by Charles Stanley Direct. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and Simon Lambert today is Lee Boyce. And coming up, the budget. What else? Don't forget, you can stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. But first, a message from our sponsors. If you're wondering how the new rules in the budget affect your finances, Lisa Kaplan and her team at Charles Stanley Direct are here to help. Their financial coaching service gives you clear, practical guidance with no jargon and no pressure. So book your free 15-minute call today at charles-stanley.co.uk/financial coaching. Go on, get answers you can trust. Remember, investment involves risk. Now let's get back to the show. So finally, we got the budget this week. Did it live up to the hype? How did it go down with the markets, the public, business? And has it sorted out Britain's finances? Plus, how did the OBR report get leaked beforehand? Simon and Lee are here to guide us through the drama, through all the measures and what they mean for us and our money. But first, Lee, Simon, welcome. A bit of a, as the young'uns say, a bit of a vibe check. An embarrassing OBR leak. An admonishment from the Speaker of the House. It was a pretty poor start, I think, to the whole affair, which had been going on for a very long time and was pretty poor for all of that time. So briefly, if you would, gentlemen, your overview of the whole event, the vibe check. Simon?
The vibe was, in my view, generally chaos. The vibe has been chaos for some time. The lead up to this budget was among the most shambolic I have ever encountered. I wrote about this in my column this week. Do you remember the pasty tax and George Osborne?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
When he announced that he was going to put VAT on hot food from bakeries, there was a big backlash against it. He had to unwind a load of other measures in that budget as well. The general vibe with that budget, which was dubbed the Omni-Shambles budget, was chaos. I think for different reasons, the general vibe with this one was chaos too. I don't think Rachel Reeves is going to have to unwind things in the same way that George Osborne did, but the months of speculation due to the delayed budget and the supposed black hole that Rachel Reeves was going to have to fill, the amount of ideas that were floated, the amount of things that were leaked before the budget. Bear in mind, there was some stuff in that budget that was exactly what had been leaked beforehand. And, you know, they did, I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy and stuff, but there is something in this thing where it used to be that you didn't leak what was in the budget before the actual budget. And it was crowned off with the final moment of brilliance, which was the leak of the OBR report about an hour before the budget, which initially, a little behind the curtains moment here, initially it was like, wow, what? Huh? Actually, this could be really helpful. So we're sitting there pouring through it. I've got Lee on the other side of the desk going, it looks like she's putting 2p on savings interest tax. Like, why would you do that? And then all of a sudden, as everybody in the office is desperately pouring through this to try and work out what's actually in the budget, someone's like, oh my God, she stood up and she's actually speaking. So you got the chaos there, all of the stuff beforehand. The actual contents of the budget, to be honest, there was a lot of stuff in there. There wasn't a lot of the big things that we maybe thought we were going to happen, or some of the rumours and things like that. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, to be perfectly honest. But there was so many things in there, so much noise, so many little tax tweaks and raises here. And I think the problem is that unless you are really financially engaged, and most people aren't, okay, if you're listening to this, then you're going to be much more financially engaged than most people. And even then, you probably thought you heard a load of noise around it. People just hear noise. They hear tax rate on savings. They hear tax rate on cash ISAs. They hear tax rate on pensions. And it just adds to the general doom and gloom. And we'd been better off with just the one big tax rise, the simplicity of it, the income tax thing. And I also feel that it just feels a bit directionless. What's the plan? Where are we going? Where's the message? What are we doing? You know, even if the plan was like to dramatically improve public services, if Rachel Reeves stood up and said, public services are a mess, we really need to do something about this, and we're just going to have to pay for it because we are living beyond our means, and I am going to tax the rich and you're going to have to pay for it. I wouldn't like it, personally. Lots of our listeners wouldn't like it. Lots of our readers wouldn't like it. But at least it would be a message, and it would be a plan, and it would be a direction of travel, so you knew that you were doing something for a reason. At the moment, we just appear to be drifting and bouncing around. And to be fair to Rachel Reeves, as I've said before, she's only continuing the same policy that the Tories had before her. But if you look at Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak, they at least had the excuse that they were at the tail end of a government that everyone knew was leaving office. Even Boris Johnson was capable of articulating a plan. And I think, unfortunately, this budget just increases the view of a government without a plan, which is embarrassing because they've got a massive majority and they're right at the start of governing. And it would really be nice to just sort out the tax system and the economy.
Clearly, she wasn't reading the IFS report that we covered in a fair amount of detail, which said, don't overcomplicate the system and maybe look to sort out the tax system. I'll get into that in more detail. But Lee, a vibe check, I suppose, was it ended up being much ado about nothing to a certain degree for the fact that we'd had so much leading up to it that anything was going to feel a bit like, ugh. But there was plenty in it that in a few years' time is going to hit people, I think. But one thing I do want to just mention briefly was I've heard a lot of criticism about financial journalists ahead of this, getting blamed for stirring the pot a bit too much, basically. And there was a good LinkedIn message from Dan Needle. He's the doyen of tax, basically, founder of the Tax Policy Associates Limited, basically saying he's really angry about it, hugely damaging to the UK, the exit tax rumours in particular, absolutely indefensible. A surprising number of intelligent people respond by saying that journalists were just causing trouble and making it up. Utterly deluded. I know for a fact the briefings were real. Just had to defend financial journalists there and say we were just doing our job. So sorry.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're in the industry of headlines and trying to make sure that, especially in financial journalism, that people are getting the right information. What hasn't helped, Georgie, I would say, for this budget, bearing in mind, I've been doing this 15, 16 years now. It has been a long and winding road to the budget. The budget has been late this year. It's at the end of November. I mean, Christmas trees are up. There shouldn't be Christmas trees up when the budget is going on, in my opinion. And whenever we've asked the Treasury to confirm or deny things that have been rumours that are spreading around everywhere, we're just trying to get the answers. And unfortunately, in the last couple of months, when we've tried to get the answers to some of those all-important financial life decisions that people are making, we are not getting clear answers. If they didn't want to take anything off the table, okay, fine, but it's a long run-up to the end of November to let those rumours really manifest, really percolate. And there could have been more done. And, next year, I mean, I'm looking ahead to Budget 2026, which is a sentence.
Oh, Lee, give yourself a break,
Which
man.
is a sentence I can't believe I'm saying out loud. It would be nice next year if it just wasn't as mad. The OBR leak was just like the cherry on top. You just think, what? No way. And actually, I was so shocked. I actually said, look, we need to fact check that this is actually the OBR report and not someone's AI-generated OBR report that they've put out there to completely baffle the entire country, because that's how cynical I am, Georgie. I was like, is this actually real? On that point, I had a sympathy with Rachel Reeves. There's nothing like your whole budget being leaked half an hour to an hour before you're about to stand up and deliver the budget. I didn't even, the first 15, 20 minutes, a lot of it went over my head what she was saying, because I was so busy pouring through this OBR document to sort of see what on earth was in here. And also all of the braying, all of the noise around that budget on Wednesday, it was out of hand from politicians across all of the parties. It was too much, Georgie. It was too much. Just tone it down, calm it down a bit. These are massive financial decisions that, aren't being taken lightly, but it just feels like it's always been a bit of a circus, but this year it felt like the circus of all circus. This was like the biggest circus that's ever rolled into town. Total embarrassment. This is us on a global stage. It's just, it doesn't look good.
I'm reading the coverage from Canada. The first thing it said was the embarrassing leak. It was just, that's the view.
Vibe check.
So that's the vibe check done. Before we dig into some of the details of it and how it's going to affect our finances, I want to look at the overall picture. Like, what was the Chancellor working with here? So 38%, that's where taxes as a proportion of GDP will be by 2029 to 30 tax year. All-time record, Simon. The impact the budget is expected to have on growth by 2030? A big fat zero. The economy, the general economy, Simon. What was she working with?
Well, what Rachel Reeves was working with was not as bad as we thought she was going to be working with. We were worried about the OBR downgrade to productivity, And there was a big downgrade to medium-term productivity. The OBR has been overly optimistic on productivity for a long time. Governments have been overly optimistic on productivity for a long time. Productivity is basically a look at how much more productive we are getting for what we do. And the reason why it's important is it's the key to getting richer. It's the key to not just keeping pace with inflation, but doing better than inflation. If our businesses can become more productive, if our workers can become more productive, if our economy can become more productive, if our public services can become more productive, it means that we can do more with the same amount, which means that we can get more from doing the same amount, and it means that our lives become a bit better. And in monetary terms for an economy, it translates into us getting richer. And if you're not doing that, it becomes increasingly difficult to generate growth. And the reason why growth is looked at as a good thing is because we need to be growing in order to at least keep up with inflation, keep up with the rising costs. There's a lot of spending going on at the moment, as we saw in the budget. For example, pensions are expensive, welfare is expensive. If we ever decided to fix the roads properly, that would also be expensive, and so on. And so what we need to do is we need to become more productive so we can start making the country a better place. The downgrade to that obviously creates an even bigger problem, because then all of a sudden Rachel Reeves trying to meet her fiscal rules, which effectively are by the end of the Parliament, she has to meet day-to-day spending from tax receipts without borrowing, right? We have to be paying our way, okay? The productivity downgrade was going to make that harder. But the overall forecast downgrade from the OBR was minimal. And this is because, in the words of the IFS report on the budget, of a stonking increase in the forecast for tax receipts. Stonking is their word, not mine. Great word to use in their report, I would say. Even before the Chancellor did anything with a productivity downgrade, receipts were forecast to be 16 billion higher in 2029-30 than previously forecast. So that means that she's getting an extra 14 billion of that from higher inflation, which is good for the public finances, because every tax threshold, again, IFS words here, every tax threshold under the sun is frozen in cash terms. This is fiscal drag in full force. Okay, another chunk comes from the OBR's judgment that growth will be concentrated in parts of the economy that we tax more heavily. So Helen Miller of the IFS said that this was lucky for the Chancellor. We talk about Rachel Reeves as having been unlucky. She likes to talk about the bad hand that she was dealt. I would say, she did campaign to be dealt that hand, but she has been unlucky. But in this instance, she was lucky. The result was only a 6 billion downgrade in the borrowing outlook. The outcome of this was that basically she's decided to raise spending, she's decided to raise taxes, and the headroom is going to go from 10 billion in the March forecast that we had earlier this year to around 22 billion, which is basically a lot better for Rachel Reeves, and in theory a lot better for the economy. It's probably the right thing to do, because what it might do is at least stem some of these worries next time round and mean the build up to the spring statement and the build up to the next budget, etc., is less damaging, because we are not expecting Rachel Reeves to have to come back and tax us again. And really, we don't want her to do that, because her first budget was meant to be one and done. Turned out it wasn't one and done. The second one raised a load of tax. And, third time, I don't think she'll be so lucky.
Lee, just briefly, Simon mentioned markets there. Mentioned a lot of things there, but markets reaction, public's reaction, business reaction.
Market reaction's been pretty positive, Georgie. I would say that she appears to have passed the initial market credibility test. We've seen UK assets rally since. It was a bit of a wobble on the day, a bit of panic and guilt and that type of thing. But on the whole, stocks, bonds, sterling have all had a bit of a rally since the budget. It appears that investors are cautiously backing the latest tax raid. If the public, it depends on your circumstances, doesn't it? But on the whole, there's a lot of ill feeling towards more frozen thresholds, as Simon was just speaking about there, and that tax burden, that 38% that you mentioned as well. I think there's a bit of ill feeling towards that, and a bit of ill feeling towards people who feel like they work hard and contribute massively to the economy, getting stung by things like potentially a mansion tax, more of us getting swept into this higher rate tax threshold, which, to be honest, was started by the Conservatives, and it's just getting further and further and deeper into the abscess. And then in terms of businesses, there's been quite a lot of small businesses that are upset, especially things like pubs and hospitality, that are claiming that this budget is going to raise their bills massively. But again, like anything, there's winners and losers on that front. But everything all seems to have kind of calmed somewhat.
Does that mean they liked it? Or it just means they didn't hate it? I mean, is it a big thumbs up?
Yeah, I think it's a bit. I think it's a bit in the middle. I think it's a more of a kind of we can tolerate it, because I think there was, in the lead up, there was really gruesome rumours, and as Simon pointed out at the start of the show, it wasn't as bad as what it could have been. And again, as Simon just said, surely the next budget shouldn't be a reason for more of a tax rate. I mean, famous last words, but that's what it would kind of suggest from the reaction so far. But we're only a couple of days in. I'm still poring over documents, Georgie. I'm still looking through things, and it's complicated, some of the things that have been sort of implemented here. So there's still some digestion to be done.
I would agree with Lee and say it's definitely option 2 from the did they love it or did they just not hate it question. If you look at gilt yields, for example, to be fair to Rachel Reeves, she had a very difficult balancing act to pull off here, because what bond investors, international bond investors, big bond investors, and the gilt market indicated the other week, when it emerged that income tax wasn't going to go up, what they wanted was for Rachel Reeves to do the big, simple, add a penny on income tax thing. And that would then show that she's serious about getting control of our finances, and she's brave enough to break the manifesto pledge, deal with the political fallout from it, and do the right thing for our finances. Once she decided she wasn't going to do that, the question is then do we go back to like all of this piecemeal stuff, but like some of the piecemeal stuff that would have been quite economically damaging? And that's what markets were saying that they really didn't like when the income tax thing was taken off the table, which is why all of a sudden you had that leak that actually it was because the OBR forecast is better than expected. It's because the OBR forecast is better than expected. Don't worry. So then she had to go into the budget and somehow raise some money, but with the tinkering around the edges, but not do the tinkering around the edges that's really, really damaging. And so the markets were saying, okay, all right, well, you've managed to pull that off this time. So, yeah, we don't hate it, but also we don't necessarily love it. And if you look at 10-year gilt yields, currently at 4.436%. Okay, 10-year bond yields in the US, 3.998%. The US is paying materially less to borrow than we are. Now, you can say that's because, the dollar is the world's, global reserve currency, all that kind of stuff. But France, for example, France is a financial basket case. There's no polite way of putting it. Their 10-year borrowing costs are 3.411%. They've got to factor in, obviously, that France is part of the EU, so the kind of ECB stands behind it and all that kind of stuff. But even Italy, 3.399%, materially lower than the UK's borrowing costs. And I think we can't say that markets really like what we're doing until we start narrowing that gap.
Right then. Okay, let's dig into some of the measures, shall we? First of all, though, this was, I'd suggest, more a budget of stealth taxes than wealth taxes. Because while everybody's been talking about income tax, that's the one making all the headlines, of course, frozen for another 3 years. So 2021, brought in, of course, by the previous Conservative government, will be extended until 2030. So we've got income tax personal allowance. Income tax higher and additional rate thresholds will stay the same, but we've also got freezes to national insurance thresholds, inheritance tax nil rate band, inheritance tax resident nil rate band, inheritance tax agricultural property relief and business property relief allowance, capital gains tax annual exempt amount, and the student loan repayment threshold frozen. And basically, about 66 billion, I believe, is that right, has been raised across these, or will be raised across these last two budgets. 88%, Lee, through stealth taxes. I have to ask you, though, the manifesto promise not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT. Now, we played with semantics on raising that for businesses in the last budget, but come on, Lee. Is this a manifesto promise break? A stealth tax? Not a rise, technically, but still.
I digest the numbers on how many people are going to be higher rate taxpayers by the end of the decade. Almost 10 million people are going to be in higher rate bands. More than double from 5 years ago. That's an incredible amount of people that are getting hoovered into. I think it's 1 in 4 will be into that higher rate tax bracket. And I've got a table in front of me, Georgie. I've actually got the OBR report, the actual physical copy in front of me right now. Income tax this year, 2024-25, 305.9 billion. 2030-31, 426.9 billion. That's an absolutely seismic jump in the amount of income tax. But the promise was there in the manifesto, and you can't say she's broken it when she hasn't actually done it. The stealth instead of wealth phrase that you just used is probably the more accurate way to say it. But the tax burden that we're undertaking for that £50,000 and above bracket is huge.
Just to put it in context of what it's actually already costing us. So bear in mind that this dates back to 2021. Inflation has been 27% since tax thresholds were frozen. Where it hits people is, for example, by freezing the personal allowance at £12,570. If you are someone who is on £12,570 a year, that's your income, and your income had gone up with inflation since April 2021, it would now be £15,964. Due to the band not rising with inflation, you're seeing that taxed at 20% on the gap between £15,964 and £12,570. If the threshold had gone up with inflation, it would all still not be taxed. It's costing someone £680 a year. £680 a year for someone who's on slightly under 16 grand a year is a materially large amount. If you look at the higher rate tax threshold, though, that's where it really hammers people around that kind of level where they've been dragged up into 40% tax. If you were earning 50 grand in 2021 and your earnings had gone up with inflation, then you'd be on 63,500 now. Of that £13,500, if the band had gone up with inflation, you'd have only paid 20% tax. You haven't. You paid twice as much tax. You paid 40% tax. So it's costing you, at the moment, this year, it would be costing that person £2,700. £2,700 is slightly more than £200 a month. If you gave someone an extra £200 a month in their pocket, right, after tax, they would definitely feel richer. Hey, that's like nearly 2 meals for the family at Wagamama's. Yeah, but seriously, that's like the difference between, like, in your life choices, that's like, okay, can we go out? Can we take the kids out to dinner? No, we definitely can't take the kids out to dinner. We don't have the money for it. That's like the money that you could save every month to pay for a family holiday once a year. It's the money that you could be putting into your pension. It might be the difference between you being able to save some money and invest some money every month or not being able to. The difference between you breaking even and not. It really does make a sizable difference to people, and that is going to continue until 2031, right? So that's only the effect that we've had that I'm talking about, not the effect that's going to come in the future. It is a massive, massive tax grab on people.
It is indeed, and it's interesting that you mentioned that £100 Wagamama's. I assume that's related to the article that was written in another newspaper talking about how much it costs to take a family of 4 out. And reading some of the comments were just like, wow, is this an article? That's how much things cost now. But that's the reality. 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, £100 for a family, a casual meal out would be considered an enormous amount. That's how much prices have gone up. And yet our income, our thresholds have stayed exactly the same. So it really does contextualise it as how much it is costing us, really. Right. It leads us on, though, to pension salary sacrifice. Now, this is often used as a way to avoid cliff edge tax rates, which we have spoken about extensively on this show, particularly something that gets Simon's goat, that brutal 60% effective rate between 100,000 and 125,000. So that's now been capped at £2,000, but we're going to have to break this down a lot. So firstly, what is salary sacrifice? How does it work, particularly with regards to pensions? Let's get that out first.
Salary sacrifice is when you forego money that would otherwise be paid to you and opt to have it paid into something else instead. And the advantage of this is By not having that money paid to you, you don't pay the tax on it, you don't pay the national insurance on it, and instead it goes directly to the cost of the other thing. It can be used for a number of things, but in most cases, if you use it for something, you will face a charge on it to get the money back, because the government says, well, we don't want you buying mobile phones, computers, etc., with salary sacrifice, so we're going to give you a charge on that to get the money back. But there are some things that the government considers a good thing. These are pensions, electric cars, and bicycles, broadly speaking. And of those things, you can salary sacrifice money without really facing any penalties. Electric cars, you face a small clawback, a small benefit in kind clawback. Bicycles through the Cycle to Work scheme, that's totally cool with the government. They're up for that. There was talk, though, that they were going to limit people using this for expensive bikes, because they said that this should be used for people buying bikes to help them commute to work, not people spunking $4,000 on mountain bikes or flash road bikes. And I must admit that I do sort of agree with that, okay? It wasn't designed for middle-aged men playing Tour de France in the Surrey Hills. It was designed to get people to the station. People are buying bikes that they would never take to the station or never ride to work with this scheme. What I don't agree with is capping it on pensions. The pensions is the important bit here. So when you do that, there's a couple of different ways that your workplace pension scheme could be run. And about a third of workplace pension schemes are run as salary sacrifice. This only really affects people in the private sector with defined contribution pensions. If you've got a defined benefit pension, which is largely in the public sector, you will emerge unscathed from this because your pension just operates differently. So our pension works as salary sacrifice. So I'll explain it from our perspective. So every month, 5% of my salary goes into my pension. And now that it works under salary sacrifice, I don't ever see that money. It's not like that money is paid to me and then it goes after I've been paid into my pension and then I have to claim the tax relief on it. It just goes, I sacrifice effectively 5% of my salary and the company pays 5% of my salary into my pension, and then it pays the money that it will match my contributions with. I'm in the fortunate position where my employer will pay 10% if I pay 5%. Okay, so many people's pensions aren't that generous. Okay, but lots of people's pensions will match, or at least more than match, in some way. Now, the benefit to me from doing that is that I don't pay any income tax, but I'd get income tax relief anyway on my pension contributions. But I also don't pay any national insurance on those contributions because money's never paid to me, therefore I don't pay national insurance. The benefit to my employer is that by not paying me the money, my employer also doesn't have to pay national insurance contributions. An employer national insurance contributions are 15%. So if you add that up across all of the people that a company employs, that's a sizable amount. The government has said that the amount that you can pay into a pension and benefit from national insurance contributions will now be capped at £2,000 per year from April 2029. So we've got quite a long time until this comes in. So what it means is that in the future, I could do salary sacrifice of up to £2,000 and get the benefit of me not paying national insurance. But above that, I will face a national insurance charge. What it doesn't mean is that I can only salary sacrifice £2,000 into my pension. I could sacrifice £10,000 into my pension every year, but I'll only get the national insurance benefit on the £2,000 of it.
And that's a really important point to note, because I got a question from someone whose wife puts in 45% of her salary via salary sacrifice. It's a lot of money, but she had a lot to make up for, which I think is what probably a lot of people do when they start earning a lot more money. Now, he was questioning, should she just put the money into an ISA instead? And I said, I'm not here to give financial advice, right? Obviously. But surely you will still get the benefit from paying less income tax, presumably, on your final pot. Is that's still the case? You just have some more national insurance to pay. And it will be quite a substantial amount more, and your employer will pay more. And they may not allow you to do that. Presumably, it's up to the employer to decide whether they give you this, right?
Yes. And so the big concern here is really the knock-on effects. So to go back to your question, Like, take, for example, someone smack bang in the middle of that 60% tax trap, where due to the removal of the personal allowance above £100,000 at a rate of £1 for every £2 that you get paid, you effectively have a 60% tax rate. There are lots of people who are saying, I don't want to pay 60% tax, so they are salary sacrificing money into their pensions if they can. This is predicated by the idea that people actually have the money spare to be able to do that. Most people would tell you that they actually need most of the money they get paid, even if they earn 110 grand, and so they can't actually salary sacrifice that much in. But there are lots of people doing this. They will still be able to salary sacrifice that money into their pension because they're not being paid it. They're foregoing it. It's going straight into their pension. They won't face the 60% tax charge on it as it stands and under the details that we know, right? You never know, things could change. The risk is, however, that employers decide that due to the extra cost of this, due to the extra hassle, that they stop offering salary sacrifice to people, at which point our theoretical 110 grand earner would have a problem, because if their employer stops offering salary sacrifice, they won't be able to do it anymore. But what they would be able to do was they would still be able to pay more money into a pension, which reduces their net adjusted income, takes them back down below it, and then they'd be able to claim the tax relief back themselves. The other problem with the knock-on effect of this is the concern is that by adding extra costs onto employers through the extra national insurance they're going to have to pay, which is only on the money that, if people decide to salary sacrifice less into their pensions and so on, but this adds up. It adds up in aggregate that employers might become less generous with their pension schemes, and you might find that our employer, for example, which is generous with its pension scheme, goes, well, we can afford to be a bit less generous with that because it's now become more expensive with us. We're looking at the bottom line. We're very sorry, but we're now only going to offer you, 8% if you're paying 5% or something like that. And that's the bit that's going to really harm people's retirements. And I think that's the bit that's the problem with this, is that we need people to be saving more money for retirement. We need people to be building up better pension pots. The government is actively involved in a campaign to try to get people to save more money for retirement, yet is actively introducing a policy that means they'll save less money for retirement and also makes people think that pensions are in some way being raided and so on. And going back to my point at the top of the show, it's just the mixed messaging going on here. And there is a risk that you end up with the unintended consequences where people will find that their pension schemes cut back on the money that they'll pay in. And you can make the argument that it's the higher earners who are taking the most benefit from this and lower earners don't get much benefit from it. But if a company cuts back on its pension scheme, all earners suffer.
That's it for part one.
I'm joined now by Rob Morgan of Charles Stanley Direct for our weekly Investing Explained feature. Rob, welcome to the podcast on a busy budget week. We have a question here from a reader. Will the cash ISA allowance cut affect my existing savings, or are they safe?
Okay, so the cut to the ISA allowance for cash is not going to affect any of your existing ISA provision at all. So whatever you've built up, you can keep in cash ISAs if they're in cash ISAs. Also bear in mind that this restriction for under 65s is not going to come in until 27-28 tax year. So if you haven't actually used your cash ISA for this tax year or next tax year, you've got potentially £40,000 there to actually put into cash ISAs even before the restriction comes in. And if you are concerned anyway, there are potentially going to be other options. So using a stocks and shares ISA does mean that you're restricted to investments, but there's lots of things that you can put in a stocks and shares ISA which are very low risk anyway. Primarily money market funds, which are funds that invest in very low risk bonds and cash deposits themselves. So, if you are taking the first steps into a stocks and shares ISA, it's maybe not as scary as you think.
Rob, thank you very much.
Welcome back. Also hit, Lee. Definitely one for you. Savers. A double whammy. Cut to the cash ISA limit, quelle surprise, for the under 65s, but also a tax hike on savings interest. Lee. Cash ISAs first. I mean, God, talk about one measure that's been spoken about enough. I mean, we did know because in the spring statement, it did say that they would be taking a look at it. Haven't they taken a look at it? They have now. What have they done, Lee? Explain.
Oh, Georgie, it was on the table, it was off the table, it was back on the table, it's now firmly cemented into the table. So the Chancellor has decided to pull the trigger onto a lower annual cash ISA limit of £12,000. That's not a huge surprise. As you mentioned, it's been trialled quite a lot. That's coming in from April 2027. I don't know why April 2027 and not April 2026. It's a bit like the salary sacrifice thing. 2029 feels really quite far in the future. But I understand things, it needs to be implemented. And actually, I've spoken to savings providers throughout my career here, and actually offering ISAs and the red tape that's involved is actually quite a lot more difficult than just an ordinary savings account. But the surprise part was the reprieve for over 65s. They'll be allowed to use the full 20,000 just to make those ISAs just that little bit more complex. They'll be allowed to use the full £20,000 allowance in cash. I guess the move was out of fear of the backlash that the Chancellor would receive from older people that don't really want to take the risk of investing. And you can understand why. We always say that investing is a 5 to 10 year outlook. Over 65s don't necessarily want to have that time frame and or want to take that risk, and would rather have their money in a savings account, and that's their prerogative. And that's what I've always argued about the cash, about the ISA in general. £20,000 a year limit is generous. The £20,000 limit for the stocks and shares element of the ISA isn't changing, so you'll still be able to use that full amount. What the Chancellor is trying to coerce people into doing is using that £8,000 extra limit, well, not extra, but the rest of that limit into investing. But I would argue that most people who are financially savvy probably already do that and do a mix of both. I just don't think it's going to do what she thinks it's going to do. And I think all it's going to do is add some more confusion to a financial product lots of people in Britain have got their head around, and now it's getting more complicated again. And then there was the second part of this, which was the bit that caught me by complete surprise when I saw the OBR leaked document, is the extra tax that's going to be on savings interest.
I'll get to that in a second, Lee. But just personally for me, and I am cynical, I'm not going to lie, there was enough evidence from experts that said this cash ISA reduction thing is going to do nothing really for investing. So the fact that the savings interest hike came in made me just think, two and two together, this is just a move to get more money. It's another sneaky little way. However, I did want to just point something out and get Simon's view on this. Right, I was watching the speech, really intently, but there might have been a bit that I sort of missed. So I just want to double check with you that I heard it right. Because obviously so much, and we know this, so much of what we invest in the UK is heavily weighted in America, heavily weighted towards tech. There was talk about getting the platform providers to make it easier in some way for us to invest in British. Did I make that up?
I don't think you made that up. There was definite talk of investment platform providers in the budget. I've not seen any actual details on this. The one thing I would say about this cut is I think it is damaging because, as Lee said, it adds complexity to something that was simple. And also, again, on the messaging front, I would just use one example of why I think maybe Rachel Reeves' messaging may not be quite as clear and pro-investing as she thinks. My wife, who is quite financially engaged and, due to her husband, subjected to quite a lot of chat about money at home, asked me last night over dinner, so am I right in thinking that I'd now only be able to invest £8,000 a year into a stocks and shares ISA? Why has she done that if she wants people to invest?
And this is the confusion. Exactly,
case closed.
Exactly. So, Simon, just to be clear, that 20 limit is staying, 20,000. You're just only allowed to put 12,000 in a cash ISA. So it's a bit like a LISA where it has its own sort of £4,000 limit thing going on. However, am I right in thinking that you can actually just keep money in cash in a stocks and shares ISA?
Well, you might discover that that's not the case. HMRC and the government are wise to this ruse, and there's some guidance coming out saying that actually you're not going to be able to do things like just hold money market funds or not going to be able to just keep cash in your stocks and shares ISA, that there'll be a charge on that as well. So there's some serious unintended consequences from that, to be honest. I mean, effectively what you're saying to people is you can't move to cash if you're worried about a market falling.
Yeah, they're telling people what to invest in.
Can't pay money into your stocks and shares ISA and then keep it in there and then drip feed it in over a period of time. They're trying to stop people from dodging the rules, but we've got a breaking story on this as we're recording the podcast. So there is not going to be the get outs that some people were thinking there were.
Wow. Well, we look forward to that, I think. Can I say look forward? We'll look out for that one. Lee, let's go back to the tax rate on savings, because it's part of a trilogy, shall I say, of hikes on unearned income. So dividends, rental income and savings, all going up by 2 percentage points. Explain.
Yeah, so currently those taxes that you mentioned, the rental income and the savings taxes at 20, 40 and 45, it's going up to 22, 42 and 47, depending on what income tax bracket you're in. It'll mean that for any savings that are held outside of an ISA and you're earning interest on, if you bust your personal savings allowance, which is £1,000 for basic rate taxpayers, it's £500 for higher rate taxpayers. Additional rate taxpayers get zero, and what that personal savings allowance is the amount of interest you can earn before you start facing tax. You're going to be facing a slightly higher tax bill on those savings balances outside of an ISA. So the cynic in you that just said, well, sure, this is going to be more money is going to head into taxable accounts. Well, that's what the OBR is saying, and it's likely to boost Treasury coffers by another £500 million a year from 2028-29. It already rakes in £6 billion a year in savings interest tax receipts. A lot of it is linked though to actually savings rates and the rates that you earn, and actually we have had a fair few years now of savings rates that have actually been good enough to get more people to breach this allowance. But it's going to mean a lot more care and attention's needed with your kind of financial savings planning. Actually, one thing I will point out about that new cash ISA limit that's coming in, well, two things I'll point out actually. First of all, there's been the unintended consequences again of Rachel Reeves putting that cash ISA up on the chopping block, is that people have absolutely cash stuffed in this past year. Lots of people have gone, this might be the last financial year that I can max out my cash. And people that potentially might have invested might have gone, do you know what, I'm just going to put it all in cash this year. I'm going to park it all in cash because I might not be able to do that next year. Well, we're going to have another financial year in which people can take advantage and cash stuff if they want. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of money is diverted into cash ISAs, which might have otherwise gone into stocks and shares ISAs. The other thing I'd say is £12,000 a year is still a generous limit, really. It's £1,000 a month is the way to think about it, and that's still a pretty chunky amount for people to squirrel away if you're lucky enough to be in that boat. But it's just it just doesn't look great. And then the other two things you mentioned there is landlords getting squeezed again. The tax that they pay on rental income will be at that 22, 42 and 47% rates from 2027. That's going to be another £500 million a year. Jason Tebb of On The Market says the additional tax on rental income is disastrous for landlords, and reform will simply see more and more landlords removing themselves from the private rental sector. Further squeeze on rental supply. Lots of other industry experts saying that it could push up rents because basically landlords will just pass on the cost. And then in terms of dividends, again, another 2-point increase, you said now. So basic rate taxpayers are going up to 10.75%, higher rate taxpayers 35.75%, and then additional rates remaining unchanged at 39.35%. That's going to hit investors and entrepreneurs pretty hard, and that's going to rake in another £1.2 billion by 27-28. Jason Hollands of Evelyn Partners said that these hikes are aimed mainly at extracting more cash from the UK small business owners who don't have the option of owning their company shares in a tax-efficient ISA. Just more of a tax grab on wealth is essentially what that trilogy is all about, Georgie.
I don't want to dwell too much on the rental, the landlord part of it, Simon, but I have about 12 followers on social media, and I put up a video about the new rules that are coming in, the new Renters' Rights Act. It's got about 500,000 views, about 500 comments. Vast majority of comments is like, this is going to absolutely screw over tenants, essentially, because more and more landlords are going to leave. And this feels like another hit to landlords, and also a suggestion, because I called it unearned income in inverted commas. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of landlords saying, we do a job. We work hard for that.
Yeah, I think the problem is that there's a lot of evidence that shows that the squeeze that we've been putting on landlords for some time now is not actually benefiting tenants, that actually it's causing tenants more of a problem. And perhaps it might be a good idea to change direction on that, or at least perhaps press pause on it. There are some bits of the Renters' Rights Bill that are good. Some bits of the Renters' Rights Bill that are good for landlords as well as for tenants. But it's certainly the continuing tax squeeze on landlords is not benefiting tenants. It's just pushing up rents, and rents are already high enough. And to go back to the dividend tax thing, not to overly labour my point about mixed messages and directionless things, but on one hand, we're telling people to invest. We're cutting the cash ISA limit to get people to invest. On the other hand, we're increasing taxes on investors. What are we encouraging investors, or are we discouraging investors? Are investors good or are investors bad? I'm really confused here. And this dividend thing is a mess, because what it's trying to do is trying to go after people disguising their income, who are employed through limited companies, and they pay themselves in dividends because dividend tax rates are lower. But the collateral damage of that, going all the way back to Spreadsheet Phil, when Philip Hammond started cutting the tax-free dividend allowance, and actually before that, when dividend rates were raised, but then you got the dividend tax-free allowance, the collateral damage has been investors, small investors, stock market investors. And it would have been so simple to not do that. It would have been really simple to just have one dividend tax rate scheme for listed companies and one for unlisted companies. And then you wouldn't have had the problem where stuff that's trying to target one end is hitting the other. And yeah, again, mixed messages, directionless. Are they good? Are they bad? Don't really understand here.
All I can say to make you feel a little bit better, Simon, is right at the start of the season, right, when Derby were losing, I said, what's the plan here? We looked on the pitch, it was rubbish. And now they're eighth in the Championship. Let's aspire to those sort of heights, Simon, that sort of level of plans coming together. Sorry about that, Lee. I just thought I had to go there. I thought there was more of an inspirational story I had in mind there than what actually came out at the end. But anyway, I want to talk about the only sort of real wealth tax that we got was in the form of a mansion tax, is what it's been called. It's actually rather snappily titled the High Value Council Tax Surcharge. That is hard to say after you've been speaking for a very long time about the budget. That comes in 2028. Again, all of these measures, many, many years hence, will affect homes over 2 million. Now, the reason it's coming in a few years is because basically the Valuation Office have been handed this rather onerous task. They're the ones that deal with council tax, and they've not dealt with that for a fair few years. So they'll be sorting this out. Expect, I imagine, many appeals on this one. Lee, how will this work?
I'm laughing, Georgie, because that mouthful that you just came out with when she said it in the budget, no wonder it's been called mansion tax. That is an absolute mouthful. Yeah, so you're right. Again, it's another long way down the line, but I guess it's to get all the ducks in a row to actually, make this work. So owners of properties identified as being valued over £2 million in 2026 prices will be liable for a recurring annual charge on top of council tax. It will be £2,500 on top of your council tax bill for properties worth 2 million to 2.25 million. Properties valued from 2.5 to 3.5 will pay 3,500. Properties valued from 3.5 million to 5 million will pay 5,000. And then the final band, £5 million or more, £7,500. Now, being told that there's approximately 100 to 150,000 properties thought to be directly in the firing line. That's quite nasty for people, isn't it? That's a massive amount of money for people to find. I get it. It's kind of it's rich people problems. If you're in a house that's worth more than £2 million, well, you can afford it. But I'm not being funny, Georgie. But it's quite likely that these people have already been taxed on this property in the form of a very high stamp duty bill, quite possibly. And it just feels just a little bit nasty. Let's try and soak the rich. Instead of tackling what the real problem is the fact that a lot of properties are, for council tax reasons, are valued at 1991 prices, and really what needs to probably happen is a massive overhaul of it all. But that is a seismic headache for any Chancellor and for any government, and for it to achieve it will just be so difficult. Instead, it feels like just another sort of add-on to be kind of like, we can do it because we can. I personally just think it's like another tax on aspiring to basically own a nice big house. Like, it's not a problem I'm going to face, but it just feels nasty is what I'm trying to say.
You say that, Lee, but, and I could be wrong with the figures here, I've just done a quick Google search. House prices over the last 10 years I think have increased by about 50%. So I know that they said that this would be going up every year in line with inflation. We've heard that one before, haven't we? So there's a part of me that thinks that I don't know this will ever come in, because they're going to be having a consultation. Simon's a bit dubious about this. They're going to be having a consultation about how this will impact those who are particularly asset-rich, cash-poor, older people who are in these homes, the effect it's going to have on the market, that sort of thing. Also, one thing is this impacts landlords, not tenants. So going back to the landlords thing, and we've got a increasing number of houses of multiple occupancy. I wonder how that will impact on those houses. I mean, it's just things that I've been thinking about. This to me just feels like if we can't sort out the council tax banding since 1991, how on earth are we going to get this done in time for perhaps the next parliament? And then I imagine if any other political party comes in, they'll just scrap this.
I think they think it's a simple way to raise money without.
But they don't raise that much. How much is it? 400 million?
That was going to be my kicker. I think they think this is going to be an easy way to implement something that makes it look like they're doing something to get people that are in expensive houses to pay their fair share, those with the broader shoulders and all of that kind of jazz that's been kind of built up into this budget. But then figures since then have suggested that the knock-on effect that this is going to have is probably going to cost the Treasury in the short term in lost transactions in terms of stamp duty. Again, let me get my book out here, Georgie. I've got here property transaction taxes, 15.2 billion for this financial year. 2030-31, 28 billion. That's where the real money lies. It's the stamp duty nonsense. And then actually, while I'm here, council tax, 47.4 billion this financial year. By 2030-31, 66.7 billion. It's a drop in the ocean. I agree. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the pasty tax of this budget.
Simon?
I think it is a uniquely bad idea. The amount of money that it raises, you know, when we talk about the amount of money something raises being a rounding error, this isn't even a rounding error. In terms of like total tax receipts and total government spending, it is absolutely minuscule. And the bad sort of headlines and feeling generated by it is not worth the money that's raised. Now, you can look at this from one perspective, people going, ha, yes, we're taxing the rich, we support doing that. But that's only within a certain chunk of society that we support doing that, right? A lot of other people just see this as the politics of envy and things like that. But the bigger problem is that this is seen as the thin end of the wedge, because people are not stupid. You introduce a new surcharge for homes above £2 million, right? And it starts at homes above £2 million. And you need a bit more money. So you're like, just drop that to 1.75. Let's drop it to 1.25 million pounds. All of a sudden you've got a charge on homes that are more than £1 million. You can argue that that won't happen. But all of the evidence with taxes in the past, in the recent past, points to that happening. Stamp duty. Until Gordon Brown started messing around with stamp duty, it was a flat 1% on homes above £60,000. And then he started messing around with it, and then he couldn't kind of resist adding in a few extra bits to raise a bit more money, a few more higher thresholds. George Osborne did the same, and we end up with this tax system that's a massive mess. Now, in Gordon Brown's defence, lifetime allowance was introduced at £1.8 million by Gordon Brown. And then it was the Tories who started chopping that one. Chop away, just bring it a little lower, bring it a little lower, bring it a little lower. And that's the concern that will happen with mansion tax. Then you've got the valuation thing. I mean, Jesus. I'm pretty sure that the spread of properties above £2 million, most of the properties are closer to 2 million than they are to the 5 million. So you're just going to end up with endless amounts of challenges of people going, my house is only worth £1.9 million. you've said it's worth £2 million, but actually the local market, the condition it's in, recent sales, all that kind of stuff, this is going to be an absolute growth industry for people doing valuations on homes around the £2 million mark, okay? So you're going to get that. You're going to get loads of challenges. And then also you've got the fact that councils have come out against this. The Local Government Association, Pete Marland of the Local Government Association, put out a statement the other day saying council tax needs comprehensive, fair reform, and local government is ready to work with the government on this. This surcharge should not create confusion over accountability, with councils likely to be blamed for a charge that is not theirs. Now, he's trying to not be too overly aggressive with his criticism there, but you can read in that quote this kind of thing from councils going, oh great, we're going to get lumbered with the blame for this and we're not even getting the money. And then there's stories today about people spying on you with drones to work out how much your house is worth and stuff like that. Yeah, it's Angela Rayner taxing your shed all over again.
All right, from our homes to our cars, Simon, electric vehicles will get a new pay per mile tax. An electric vehicle excise duty charge will be introduced from April 2028 to plug the fiscal hole created by lost fuel duty as more drivers switch to battery-powered cars, which, talk about mixed messages, I thought that's what they wanted. It's predicted to raise just under $2 billion for the Exchequer's coffers by 2030. So, Simon, please don't say they're going to start putting telematics in our cars and monitoring everywhere we go.
Yeah, you're going to have a drone flying above you checking.
Drones, yeah, could be.
No, they're not going to make everybody put telematics boxes in their cars. But unfortunately, that's probably what they need to do paper mile charging. Paper mile charging has been on the cards for a really long time now. The previous government looked at it. People have spent a long time looking at it, which means that the detail around this is a little bit embarrassing, the stuff in the budget, because considering the amount of work that's gone into this, it's a bit kind of full of holes, like a piece of cheese. And I will let Lee fill you in on a little bit more of that, because he watched a wonderful piece of television this week that he can tell you about. But the only thing I would say is the difficulty is really, to do this properly, you need to be able to track people's mileage in their cars. The government doesn't want to do that because they'll get accused of Big Brother, privacy, all that kind of stuff. And they're still smarting from that half-baked plan to bring in digital ID cards that they're still sticking with. So to come out in the budget after all of the build-up we've had and say, yeah, guys, actually, we're going to have to put something in your car that tracks you, wouldn't have been popular. So they're not going to do that. Instead, they've come up with another idea, and I will hand over to my colleague, Mr. Boyce, now.
Yeah, it's just going to be down to you just to submit how many miles you've done that year.
Like a self-assessment tax form.
Yeah, a mileage self-assessment. Well, actually, on Thursday morning, I was just a bit budgeted out. I decided to leave for work about half an hour later than usual. I just needed that little bit of extra time. I thought I'd see the kids, just been a bit neglected this week. Big, bad budget has, come into family life. Well, actually, my 18-month-old has got obsessed with the remote control, and she pressed on the TV and it was Charlie State at the BBC interviewing Rachel Reeves. I'm actually not sure where she was, but I caught about 90 seconds of it, and he was asking how EVs within the first 3 years of a new car, because you don't have an MOT on the first 3 years, so you wouldn't necessarily know what there's no official tracking of what the mileage is, how they would implement it. Basically, Rachel Reeves had absolutely no idea how to answer, and her response was, well, by the time it comes in 2028, we've got 3 years to devise how it will work. But people can see on their dashboard how many miles they've done, and they can input it. And I just thought, I don't actually think she really knows. Someone else has suggested this. She signed it off, and I don't think she quite grasps the concept of MOT, how a new car works, and how this is going to fully work. It's rocked the industry somewhat, I would say. It's mixed messaging. They've launched a grant this year for people to go electric, and electric cars are a big commitment. They're a lot more expensive typically than petrol equivalents. If you haven't got home charging, you're probably not going to get anywhere near the big savings that you could get. So you really do need to have a home charger. Even still now, it is a massive difference. But then also at the same time, you're now getting told you're going to be charged per mile. And I just think people see that as a Big Brother move and just don't like the sound of it. It's a hard one, though, because the Treasury are going to be losing out on a lot of money from fuel duty as people make the switch. and it has to be filled somehow. And if not doing that, then how? And I guess that's why they've pulled the trigger on it.
Right. So I'm just going to do a quick fire. Some of the things that were mentioned in the speech, some of the things that were mentioned actually in the budget document. Obviously, it's not through weighting of importance. It's just if we kept talking, we'd be talking all day, and people have got things to do, including you listeners. So 2-child benefit cap, that was scrapped from April 2026. Another consultation into the LISA to simplify that. Energy bills reduction of 150 quid. Help Save made permanent in a few years. Fuel duty frozen. Is it the 15th year, Simon? I've lost count. Plus, apparently, more transparent pricing on the forecourts. National living wage increased to £12.71 an hour from April 2026. Stamp duty reserve tax exemption for new listed companies 3 years post-listing. A US-style whistleblower reward scheme for tax fraud. And finally, just want to find it, is there anything that we can do to budget-proof our money?
Yes, there is. The best thing you can do to budget-proof your money is to pay attention to it. Don't let this stuff pass you by. Obviously, you've listened to an entire podcast about it by the time you've got here, right? But it's still, I tell you what, though, it's still very easy to listen to an entire podcast about something and then not do anything about it. It's very easy to write about this stuff, be on podcasts and talk about it, and talk to people all day long about it and still not do nothing about it, okay? I am the greatest example of knowing what I should do and then not doing it. It's what people do. We're busy. We don't have time. We're out there earning money, paying tax, doing all the things that we need to do to help keep the economy afloat. Spend some time looking after your finances. If you sat down and made a checklist of the things you need to do and plan to do it over the next 3 to 6 months, you could tick off a load of this stuff and sort it out. So pay attention to what you're doing with your money. That is the most important thing that you can possibly do.
Quite. Finally, Simon, do I have a stat of the week from you?
Yes, £1. That's my stat of the week. That is the price that I paid for a flight because I finally booked a flight with some Avios. Yes, after all those years of talking about it, regular listeners will know that I am an absolute idiot who has a BA Amex card, has been collecting Avios for years and occasionally not paying his bill in full and therefore incurring interest charges that far outweigh any benefit I will ever gain from the Avios, which was none until this week when I finally, after all these years, booked a flight with some Avios, and after paying for it with 19,000 and something points, I only had to pay £1 in cash.
Simon, you are an inspiration to me with my 300,000 points that are just being racked up and not doing anything with it. So thank you. Inspirational Simon. Right, that is it. Where are you going, by the way? Anywhere exciting?
My wife is flying to Munich one way.
Oh, she's not coming back? This doesn't sound like the positive conversation that this could have been, Simon.
This is because this is part of a wider trip. My flights are already booked. We're flying back with Lufthansa because it's only the flights out there that we're taking with BA. So I only needed to book one single one-way flight. I've not used my Avios to just send my wife to another country and not have her back.
Anyway, sorry. Thank you very much for that, Simon. I'm sure you haven't just sent your wife one way off to Munich, never to return. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. And if you have any comments or questions, theme or anything you'd like them to look into, Simon,
email us at podcast@thisismoney.co.uk. And actually, a shout out here for listeners. If you've got a question for Steve Webb, a pensions question for Steve Webb, send your questions in. Just email them to podcast@thisismoney.co.uk. We'll pick them up there. Okay, but send Steve your questions. He wants some more questions from our listeners on the podcast. And you can come to thisismoney.co.uk/podcast to find all podcasts past and join in the debate and read the comments.
and if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? Helps other people find us too.